Helsinki. I'm very excited to be here. As a matter of fact, I'm so excited I almost had to do a Yannakaka. Thankfully, it did not happen. We're going to talk about how to commercialize in deep tech, the really hard stuff. I have to disagree with the last speaker that when you're raising 500 million, that you don't need to pay attention to your customers. It's the same thing. You have to pay a lot of attention. My name is Moritz. 6.5 years ago, we set out with Marvel Fusion to pioneer a new approach in laser-driven inertial confinement. We're currently building our technology demonstrator in the US. It's a 200 million investment to showcase our fusion technology under power plant compatible conditions. And after that, we want to move on to building the prototype. Now, what does it take to commercialize? When people usually think about this, they think we're in a garage building funny things. They think about unicorns and maybe IPOs. In my experience, and I've been doing this now for 27 years as an entrepreneur, it looks more like this. It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. And this customer focus is as relevant with 500 million as it is with 50,000 bootstrapped. You have to pay attention to your market, to the product that you're building. And I would argue in deep tech, the implications and the consequences you may have weigh much, much heavier than in a 4-week software sprint, my former life, where you can correct mistakes a lot faster and a lot easier. When you're betting tens and tens of millions or even hundreds of millions on technology, consequences weigh a lot heavier. So we think about technical designs. How do we build a product? How do we stay within commercial boundary conditions? And this is actually an example of our silicon-based nanostructures that we use for the coupling of the laser, which would be coming in from the top. These structures are absolutely perfect, but it took us 5 years to make them. And this is the result. So you have to have the long-term vision. You have to have the perseverance to stick through some of these hard product cycles that are not 4 weeks, but typically years. So it's very painful to build these companies, to actually get to first customer engagements, first revenues. And I've picked up 2 numbers here which showcase that it takes around 7 years to reach $1 million in revenue, and it takes 12 years to reach 100 million in revenue. So this is for, again, perseverance, the patience, the vision and belief that you have in your product. But again, when you're spending 400 million and in many cases more on actually having a product that a customer is willing to pay for, then you have to be very, very good, very detail-oriented in the preparation, in your simulations, in your designs that you're eventually putting into a product cycle where you're spending, in our case, for example, 50 million on a laser prototype system. If that's the wrong system and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do once it's prototyped, then you've sunk 50 million and you don't know if you have another 50. So just to pick you up why this is so difficult. It is difficult because you're taking scientific achievements, something that comes out of a lab, a university, an institute that is scientifically interesting, or in the best case, scientifically sound, but it is in no way anywhere near a commercial application. So these ideas, products, they make their way into a commercial market or into a product for the very, very first time. So the technology that you need in order to translate those types of ideas into something that actually works and has a commercial benefit to a customer is why this is so difficult. You have no idea what you need to build, and it's a step-by-step process involving a lot of money and a lot of time to actually get there. The science risk comes with very uncertain timelines. It's not like you have a battery, which is a known product, and you kind of estimate, okay, this will take me 2 years to make a new battery. This is uncertain timeline. You actually don't know how much money you will need, how much runway, in order to actually get to a point where this is suitable for an application. It has typically gaps in your roadmap. You kind of have bits and pieces, but you don't know actually where you're headed. You're constantly running around for money because typically you are raising in the hundreds of millions or in the billions to build these types of products. We have now raised roughly $460 million, and our next step is to somewhere raise between 500 million and $1 billion. So that comes with very particular challenges, the milestones you need to make, the de-risking you need to demonstrate, and then last but not least, in some of these products you have a regulatory framework that is uncertain, and you don't know, can you actually put that specific medicine on the market? Can you launch your rocket from location A or B? Or can you operate a fusion power plant in country X or Y? Now, my path took me from financial software to arguably one of the hardest, most complex problems that humanity currently is facing. And I made a lot of mistakes across all of those years, and learned a lot what it takes to get first customer traction, to sell a first product, and to be positioned in a market that you have a chance of survival. Again, if you're burning 50, 100 million and it doesn't fit, your chance of survival become a lot slimmer in those early days. Now, how could a potential playbook for commercialization look like? I'm coming back to this point of product market fit, where scientific achievements, scientific insights don't necessarily mean that you will ever reach a commercial product. If you're in biotech and you have to go through clinical trials, maybe first clinical trial, it's all over for your product. It will never reach the market, and you may have burned 250 million and you're nowhere. So very early, you have to understand what this scientific breakthrough could potentially mean for that specific market. The product that you're designing and the technologies that you need to reach that, these technologies need to have a certain level of traction, a certain level of confidence that you can actually build this. In our case, high energy short pulse lasers were on the horizon. They had been built in certain specifications, but they hadn't been built in the performance parameters that we needed for our approach. So the product to translate the scientific achievement step by step towards a fit where a customer is willing to pay for, that is a very, very critical point to ensure that you're not just running down a rabbit hole of a experiment that is just conducted with nicer technology, but it just stays an experiment and it never moves into a commercial application. Diversify your funding sources. If you need 500 million, a billion, or in our case, 2 billion for the first prototype, this cannot all come from equity, or at least it's very doubtful, particularly in Europe. So what we have done is we very early engaged with political stakeholders, both in Europe and in the US, and we very successfully tapped on public funding. And I believe for a lot of these deep tech approaches, also in biotech space, a lot of these pockets are available, and you need to tap on those pockets in order to diversify, but also obviously to provide a leverage to the equity investors who are taking great risks in due course of the development of these companies until you reach a point where you actually have a slight confidence that this might meet a market need. And while we all agree that in the case of Marvel Fusion, if I ask you who wants competitive baseload energy at 1 cent per kilowatt hour, you would probably all say, yes, I do. But can we actually, with our approach to that problem, fusion energy, can we solve it? Can we build a product that runs eventually a 24/7 power plant reliably and competitively? That is the big question. And diversifying funding and taking some risk of the equity investors is a very important piece in the puzzle. The next important point is that you need to set yourself milestones. The problem that you're trying to solve is usually such a big pile of problems that you need to slice the elephant into pieces. You have to set milestones along the way so that you don't get lost. Focus on the most critical items and let go of some of these smaller items. They simply need to be solved in due course and later on. And then also very important, and this is the cornerstone of this talk, commercialize early. In our case, we now have built a separate team within the company that is looking to commercialize our laser technology for various other applications in material science, medical applications, and that is an opportunity which we as a company very distinctly pursue to bring in revenue to help us, again, mitigate funding risk, but also demonstrate to investors that the technology that will be later on needed for a fusion power plant is already in a market environment in operation with a customer, and we can showcase that we can scale the technology, we can scale components, and have made it through, if you want to call it, our clinical trials for some of these components, that they meet market standards and that customers are actually willing to pay for those products. Partnerships, another, I would say, absolute critical point. Marvel Fusion is now a 100 people company. What we build in lasers, in nanostructure technology, what we saw earlier in power plant components, we could never do on our own. We have partnered with, for example, Siemens Energy for the power plant components. I think it's an 80,000 people company. They are credible to deliver this to the market. We've partnered with the IMEC facility in Belgium for these nanostructures. And if you look in the biotech sector, BioNTech partnered with Pfizer for the go-to-market strategy because they were well aware that they could not tackle this on their own and make it a commercial success. At some point, they knew they had a winner, but then how do you actually create commercial success out of that winner? So striking partnerships which are mutually beneficial, distribute economic value across the partnership is absolutely crucial in these really, really hard problems when you're eventually, in our case, looking to build a power plant that will take up 2 football fields and is a highly complex technical installation. Last but not least, political engagement. While in the technology development you have shades of gray. You build, you don't succeed, you go back, you try again, you hire another talented engineer, you bring in some more money. Politics is 0 and 1. They can kill you from one day to the next. If you don't have the regulatory framework, if you don't have the political support, you will not launch your rocket, you will not market your medicine or your vaccination, and you will not build your power plant. So making sure that you sit within a political environment, a regulatory framework that wants you to succeed, that is supportive, is a 0 and 1 risk. This is something you need to be aware of from day one. This can kill you very, very, very quickly. The positive news is that in Europe, these hard things are possible. And we've built some incredible companies that have showcased how we can market, commercialize deep tech products, scientific achievements, ideas that over years and years and years and hundreds of millions of funding have made their way to a market and are either already hugely successful or are foreseeably very, very, very successful. Number 1, ESA Aerospace. They launched from Norway their first rocket. It lasted, I think, 25 seconds roughly, which is a huge success, and their second launch is coming up in a few weeks. Over the past years, ESA Aerospace has built a production line of integrating most of the building into the company, utilizing 3D printing, building their own rocket engines, and now being able to move on sovereign launch capabilities in Europe that will take down the cost for the payload dramatically as compared to the Ariane space rocket, which is a paradigm shift in launch capabilities. Very, very dominant already, of course, but it is a fantastic example, is ASML. This machine actually is running on lasers shooting 50,000 times per second at a liquid tin drop that then creates the UV radiation that you need to produce chips. This machine is giant. You will probably not fit it on this stage. It is brutally complex. It required integration of some of the most complex technological components and then make it work as a machine itself. It sits at the world's most renowned chip manufacturers, and ASML has become a de facto monopoly. They're Europe's most valuable technology company. I had the honor of standing in front of the machine It is absolutely humbling what they put together. And honestly, every dollar of revenue and every dollar of valuation that these guys have is more than deserved. It is absolutely breathtaking what ASML has achieved with their lithography machines. Next is BioNTech. Founded in Germany, the two founders came out of the lab and they had this idea of mRNA possibly being a technology that would change medicine, that could change vaccinations. For over 10 years, the existing pharma industry has battled them over this technology that mRNA would never play a role and that conventional vaccinations is the way to go. It took a lot of time and a lot of money going through these clinical tests, making sure that this is safe, that it is actually possibly the one way that might work best against, for example, COVID-19. And then when COVID hit, they teamed up with Pfizer on the marketing and arguably created one of the biggest blockbuster biotech success stories in the last decades. But it shows another element which is very, very often seen in these types of groundbreaking innovations. The existing market incumbents, they fight you. They don't want you to be successful. You're bringing a paradigm shift to a market where the incumbents will say, this will never work. This little company will not survive. The founders are all crazy and they don't know what they're doing. And then it is about this persistence, not only in developing the product and the technology, but it is also about the persistence in staying true to your beliefs. These companies require a lot of stamina. And that brings me to Marvel Fusion. This is my colleague, Marius Schollmeier, the head of our experimental team. He's a physicist, incredible scientist. And over the last 6.5 years, Marvel Fusion has pioneered a proprietary path utilizing high-energy short-pulse lasers to irradiate those nanostructures that we saw earlier to reach so far unseen efficiency in how we bring energy into our target, into what we call plasma, which we eventually need to fuse 2 atom cores to create a fusion product that is lighter than what is going in. And the difference is energy that we can harvest. Over these 6.5 years, we had to encounter the same pushback from the incumbents using long pulse lasers, using deuterium tritium as fuel, where we have moved to boron-based fuels because they're deep, very cheap and easy to handle. And moving on paradigm shifts that bring fusion energy step by step closer to the commercial application. Absolutely critical was the partnership with Siemens Energy over the last 4 years. They've now invested in the company in the last funding round, but they have made sure that we're not building a nice physics experiment, but that we stay within the boundary conditions for a commercial power plant. Equally important was the early engagement with potential customers from aluminum, steel, chemical manufacturing, and of course, data centers and AI. Data and AI will drive energy demand to new heights. We will need so much energy that fusion now moves within the solution space. But it needs to come fast, and it needs to be competitive, And it needs to be something that the customer is willing to pay for. So you have to meet a price point of probably 5 cents per kilowatt hour over the next 10 to 15 years. You have to have a power plant that is reliable, runs 24/7, flawless. The technology that we're currently building for Colorado is prototypical. There will still be a guy with a screwdriver next to it making sure that he jumps it back up when it's shutting down. In a power plant, that cannot be the case. So we're at an inflection point where we are turning our science into technology, and this is what we're currently doing, and then in the next step, into a commercial application that we can operate successfully 24/7 for customers in Europe and around the world for the different mission-critical applications, production processes that these customers have, and then hopefully also for the good of humanity in Africa, which is doubling population, where we need saltwater desalination, where we need to increase the standard of living, and where we hopefully see abundant, cheap, clean energy coming for all of us. Thank you very much.